Muy buenas tardes, bienvenidos a todos. Ya vamos a comenzar nuestra charla. Les agradecemos por favor mantener sus teléfonos celulares en silencio. Les informamos también que al final de la charla tendremos firma del libro. Muchas gracias.
Okay. Hello, and welcome here to present at Hay in Belén. My name is Rosie Boycott, and I'm a trustee of the Hay Festival here in Colombia. This is my second visit to Medellin, and it's fantastically nice to be back here. And I'm really thrilled today that we're joined all the way from Finland by Sofi Oksanen, who is the author of two astonishing books. One, Purge, which I know is over there, Purge, I think in Spanish, and her other, well, new book to me, not quite so new to you in the Spanish-speaking world, When the Doves Disappeared. These are extraordinary stories. They are, as we were talking before, Sophie, they are very tough. They are very raw. You don't spare the reader from the really hard situation that you're talking about, the politics of your country. And it's somehow amazing to me that Purge has sold now over 2 million copies. They've gone into 49 different translations and different countries. And just this week, Sophie signed a deal for her first Arabic translation. So these hard stories about life through the communist regime in your homeland and the Nazi regime in the second adult have struck a nerve. But normally you think of a bestseller as being, well, a kind of lovely love story or whatever. So do you ever wonder?
Absolutely. And also, I want to say hello to everyone. I'm very happy to be here. This is actually my first trip to Colombia, to Medellin, and also to Latin America. So I'm very happy to be here. But yes, I mean, usually it goes like books that get good reviews, they never sell, and books, bestsellers, they don't get good reviews. So in a way, the combination of getting critical acclaim and also the sales, it's impossible. And that is something I knew already as a kid and as a teenager. I've always wanted to be an author, and I was also studying about authorship by reading biographies. So in a way, I knew that reality. So in a way, I wasn't expecting to have literary prizes and the sales, because it's usually an impossible combination.
So what do you think made your books, well, Purge specifically, leap out of the boundaries of Finland and the critical acclaim to sell this huge number of books worldwide? What is it about the story that so resonates across the world?
Well, for me, it's difficult to say, because I'm writing stories located in Estonia, country about which most of the people living in the world cannot put on a map. So, Estonia has 1.3 million inhabitants. So I have more readers than inhabitants in Estonia. So in that way, that's a kind of already the location itself is something that I'm not expecting everyone to know anything about. Estonia, I'm writing in Finnish, which is a small language. That's another challenge, especially, for example, finding translators, because there are not too many translators translating from Finnish to any languages. So that's another challenge. When I think about or also, those might be things that, for example, publishers by rights might be a little bit worried that how can we find a translator? Okay, can we expect our readers to be interested in a story located in Estonia? But now, after the years and after meeting a lot of readers from different parts of the world, I think one of the universal stories is stories of occupation, and how occupation affects people's lives, poor people's lives, and for example, also immigration is another universal theme. I'm writing about immigration, and perhaps these two things are something that, people in most of the countries in the world have some kind of understanding or some kind of personal connection to these things. except for Western countries, perhaps, because they have easier recent past than, for example, countries with the authoritarian recent past or dictatorships. Perhaps these, but also I hope that my stories are written in a way that they are easy to read. That's at least something I'm aiming at. I never know.
I think you will succeed.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
No, I think you have succeeded very well. I mean, it's you say recent past. I mean, yesterday, day before yesterday, sorry, lost the night of the flight. It was Memorial Holocaust Day in Britain, and we still had a lot of people who've been in the camps who were talking about keeping it alive. But it is obviously with you, with your books, the whole memory of you grew up under the Soviet occupation. What was that like growing up?
Well, it was part of, I mean, it was ordinary life. So at the time, I didn't consider it like exceptional, or I didn't consider it as an exception in Estonian history. Estonia has been occupied so many times, so in a way, kind of occupation is something that there's always someone who wants to walk over the country, you know, there are always rulers coming and going, and people just stay. So in that way, the existence of Estonia as a nation and the existence of the language as well, I think they are both, you know, quite survival stories. But when occupation is like, you know, ordinary, then of course after Estonia regained the independence in 1991, after the Berlin Wall came down and the Soviet Union collapsed, and that is when we started to create the language, how to talk about occupation. That was also crucial to me, because during the occupation, of course, it was not possible to talk in public about occupation. The Soviet Union said that they were not occupiers. And the Soviet propaganda was very hard. There was no freedom of press, no freedom of expression. History was extremely political. The official history was following the Soviet propaganda. So people had to learn the language, how to talk about the recent past. We had to also learn the language, how to talk about Gulag, how to talk about concentration camps in Siberia. When I was a kid, we were just talking about the people who were sent, or people who were taken, or people who were taken away, or people who came back. But it was not said like, you know, where they were sent or where they came back. Of course, it was camps or prisons, but it wasn't said like that. We were always using euphemisms. And also...
But was that because if you talked about the experience, that was a dangerous thing to do?
Yeah, it was dangerous in a way. It is dangerous in a country which is a totalitarian regime. And one thing that was typical of the Soviet system was that, in a way, you couldn't actually, you could tell that which themes or subjects or expressions are forbidden ones, but at the same time, you couldn't actually predict. I mean, you could say that it's not wise to talk about occupation publicly. It's not wise to talk about occupation over the phone. It's not wise to write letters about occupation. You could be sure of that. But then again, in a way, it was impossible for us to know if we didn't, for example, get the visa. We were living in Finland, so we needed to have the visa to be able to travel to the Soviet Union. And if we didn't get that, we didn't know the reason for that, because the reasons were never given. So in that way, it was unpredictable. Of course, also you learn to, nowadays, I mean, we have excellent communication systems, but when I was a kid, there were no mobiles, and it was very difficult to get the phone call to any Soviet Union part, actually. So you had to order the phone call and then wait to get that. And if it was certainly you didn't get that, you don't know what the reason why you didn't get that. So in a way, it was a system that was paranoid and was feeding paranoia as well, and that also leads to world where people are also centering themselves as well.
And certainly in the character in When Doves Disappear, the Edgar character, who you follow through the occupation, and he is someone who's stirring up trouble for his neighbours, he's completely untrustworthy, he's trying to get ahead in the machine. How on earth did characters, what happened to characters like that in 1991? Because
that's a good question. That's a good question. People like that, and well, some of them became like Putin, because Putin is an old KGB man. So,
but then they would have had to leave Estonia. Was there a life for them in Estonia?
Still, last year a few moles were found in Estonian security officials. The moles for Russian, they were Russian spies. So in a way, after Estonia regained the independence, what happened was that Estonia had to make an agreement with Moscow and with Russia that they had to let KGB leave the country in peace. That meant that people remember how the KGB headquarters, they were like chimneys were used all the time. They were burning the papers, so there was smoke coming from the chimneys night and day, and also lights on in the building night and day. On chimneys, just smoke. All the material and archives, they went to Moscow, so that's the material we cannot never get our hands on. Some of them managed to stay in Estonia, but still, it's in a way it's likely that it's impossible to know who were all the people who were actually KGB. That's what it actually means.
Does it mean the society is suspicious of itself, of each other?
Well, it's kind of, yeah. And on the other hand, the difference between, sometimes it can also lead to a sort of paranoia, because everyone who is not sharing your opinion, it doesn't mean that, the person is immediately somehow connected to KGB. But on the other hand, I do dare say that Estonians do have a nose for KGB as well. I mean, we can say that, for example, if a person who has had certain kind of accommodation or a car, for example, during the Soviet Union, and if that car wasn't something that an ordinary person could get their hands on, then that means that that person did have some kind of connections. What? We cannot know that, but some kind of connection. So in that way, you can, trace people's histories in that way, but it's very difficult to get, the hard evidence to someone's background. But there have been a few trials about deporters, those who deported people to Siberia. And the problem with those trials was that Russia wants to get involved with those trials, and that becomes politically very, very complicated. So after Soviet Union collapsed, there hasn't ever been public trials like Nuremberg trials with the Nazis. So there hasn't been anything like that, and that is something that makes the Soviet occupation period different compared to German occupation.
Yes, going back to the German occupation and the whole question of people all through the Doves, there is a sense of people collaborating with the other side because of fear. I mean, you paint a wonderful portrait of Jews collaborating with Nazi because she's getting a better life. How did you research and kind of come up with that kind of character who then, of course, has such a very strange journey through that book?
Estonia, like all Baltic states, they have this double occupation history, which means that they were first Soviet occupied, then German occupied,
after that Soviet occupied, which is quite rare actually when you think about the whole European.
It's happening anywhere else.
No, it's in that way it's unique, and that meant that in just a few years the whole system changed, and also that meant that the legal system changed, and also that meant that there was no any kind of stable society at all, and the German occupation was kind of well, it was short. It was 3 years, and I was reading a collection of biographies from that period. Those who were children at the time, they were writing their memoirs about the time. And I noticed that in every single story, the person said that I knew someone who had an affair with a German officer. I knew a girl who had an affair. But then everybody seemed to know someone, but there wasn't a single person who said, like, I had. And that's when I started to think, okay, where are these ladies? Like, what happened to them? Some of them, of course, went to German when Germans left the country, they went to German, but some of them stayed. And of course, I wanted to know what kind of life a person could have had, what kind of choices she must have been forced also to have, because having an affair with a German officer was like a death sentence during the Soviet.
Do you feel, I couldn't quite tell what level of sympathy you feel towards her, whether she had a choice?
That's a good question. She's a married woman, and she has an unhappy marriage. And nowadays, it's very easy to get a divorce if you are unhappy in your marriage. But at the time, it wasn't that simple. So she's just a person who is looking for love, and at the same time, she's very having controversial feelings in a way. Because she also is compelled to help the Estonian freedom fighters and resistance movement as well. So in a way, she's torn between the love and the Estonian freedom. And actually, when I was doing the background research for the book, one of the most chilling material I read, it was the Nazi documents or reports the Sicherheitsdienst sent to Berlin, so the security service reports.
You were able to get access to that?
Yes, I mean, it's public information. Estonian history research is extremely good now, and they have been very active in publishing all kinds of documents. So there's actually a huge book, just the documents, the reports the Germans were sending to Berlin. And they were very carefully following the local atmosphere and local sentiment. And the moment when Germany occupied Estonia, it was the moment right after the first mass deportations in Estonia. That was 1941, and that was the deportations Soviets made. So Soviets deported a huge number of Estonians to Siberia, and people were really scared. People were scared of trains, and in those German reports, there are these lines. People are so afraid of trains, because they don't want to be in the trains. And of course, why Germans were so interested in the trains was the simple fact that they wanted to create their own concentration camp network in Estonia, and they wanted to transport Jews to Estonia. So they wanted to know.
Every Jews from Germany?
Yes, and from Poland and from Lithuania and Latvia as well. So in a way, they were focusing on thinking, what's the reaction of the local people? And the reaction was that people are so scared, they don't want to know they don't want to know what's in the trains.
So they didn't do it?
No, they did. I mean, there was, the thing is, the local people didn't, for example, arrange sabotage for the trains. I mean, Germans could be secure that they can get the Jews and the camps in Estonia because the local Estonians are so afraid of the trains because they don't want to be in the trains themselves.
What a history to have. You, in your speech that you gave to Frankfurt Book Prize last year, you talked a lot about the importance of women as well in the history of writing, Estonian history. In particular, the woman who is on your, so you probably can't see, but Sophie has an amazing brooch on with a portrait of, what's her name?
Yeah, my hero, Fredrika Runeberg, is...
That will really challenge the translator.
Yeah. Yeah, Fredrika Runeberg was a Finnish author, actually the first Finnish author who wrote the first novel in Finland and also the first historical novel. And it happened to be a female who wrote the first novel and the first historical novel. And she was also a wife to our national poet. And of course, at the time, nobody cared about her, only for the husband, who was a great poet and celebrated as such. But now the later generation have been also paying attention to the role of the wife and also to her work, and the novels were great. So,
are there many young Finnish female authors at the moment?
Plenty. I think actually over 50% of the authors are female.
And you, in Perth, you certainly took up a great women's cause in terms of trafficking. Is that a big thing in that around Estonia, Finland?
At the moment, no. But when I started to work on the Perch, it was a time when I had the feeling that we need to talk about this more. Also because Finland seemed like a country who thinks that they have nothing to do with trafficking. It's like nothing that doesn't touch us, even though it's a transport country. And now we've also had some cases of human trafficking. So in a way, it has been going on all the time. But at the time I was writing, I think it was like, Finland had something to do with this. At the time, Estonia didn't have, for example, a law against human trafficking.
Where are people being trafficked from and to?
From different territories of Russia, and of course Eastern European countries. And that's also one reason why I wanted to write the story is that good soil for human trafficking was one consequence of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Because, I mean,
why? I sort of half know that, but I don't know quite why that was a consequence.
Well, first of all, the collapse of the Soviet welfare system. That meant that lots of poverty. In 90s was a chaotic time when old people didn't get their pensions, factory workers didn't get their salaries. It was a chaotic.
This is in which countries? In
the whole eastern, in Russia especially, and that also meant the collapse of the whole system meant that there were a lot of, for example, security service workers who needed work. And they turned to organized crime. So that's actually how Russian mob started. And of course, organized crime is always interested in human trafficking. It's always drugs, weapons, and women. That's the three big things. And that meant that also those people, because those people who were privileged during the Soviet Union, that meant also the security service workers, or somehow privileged, who always were somehow connected with the KGB or the party. They were the ones who had access to natural resources. They had the access to also to gas companies, energy companies, mines, and they were the ones who, well, they are oligarchs.
Yeah.
Now they have the money, and those were the ones who started to rule the new world, which was perfect for human trafficking, and also because borders were open. So,
And is it still as much today or more? Or where is it now?
I don't know if you have exact numbers or can we even have, but the good thing is that Estonia does have now a law against human trafficking. It was the last European Union member who actually didn't have a law, but it does have now. Romania is still bad. I think they don't even know what's the number of missing people. So in that way, Ukraine is really bad as well, or was bad. So in a way, I'm very much feeling for Ukrainians who are want, a better future without corruption. And now they are having the war, which we'll see what's happening. But in many East European countries, there's a lot of problems with the human trafficking.
Did the corruption just take over or stay behind after the Soviet Union fell? Because Ukraine seems to be tremendously corrupt from what one reads about.
Ukraine is extremely corrupted. Now they are trying to get rid of it, but of course, I mean, the war is going to be on focus. But it was. So now I'm saying that it was extremely corrupted, and especially the eastern Ukraine. There was a lot of child porn and things like that. Of course, and especially because they had open border to Russia, so in a way it's very easy to contraband whatever you want. When I think about the Baltic states, those three countries took totally different directions actually after the collapse of Soviet Union, and Estonia has done quite a remarkable progress. In just 20 years, they have got rid of the corruption, not totally, but well enough. They are holding they are number 13th on the freedom of speech. And that's also something I wasn't kind of expecting. Freedom of speech and corruption are always somehow connected to each other. So that's I'm very proud of that. Lithuania and Latvia are quite complicated. In Latvia, there's a lot of Russian money, which does make the difference as well.
And what's the role of women in these post-Soviet states?
When we talk about equality in general, then it does have a little bit different echo in Eastern European countries compared to Western European countries. One reason for that is that, Soviet Union was officially equal, and everybody knew that it wasn't equal. So in a way, it does have a kind of dark shadow. It sounds like something you cannot actually trust.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, I've been thinking that we ought to have a totally new word, for equality in Eastern European countries. Something that doesn't have that shadow. Something that people could actually honestly believe that equality could be possible. But the problem is that Eastern European countries, the level of income is very low, and equality cannot actually, it cannot be very successful in countries where the level of income is low.
Is there a feminist movement?
That's a tricky question in a way.
Any kind of women's?
Yes. Well, think about the Ukrainian women, for example. I mean, they are active women. And also in Poland, there's a lot of energy in Poland as well. But when I think about, for example, women's studies, then the thing is that women's studies are mostly funded, the money comes from the West. And that sounds like
Bit patronizing.
yes, and that's a kind of tricky thing. But things are going better in a way. So in a way, not to wrong direction, but the progress just takes time. And also something that that's a kind of problematic. It's also that when we think about 60s in Western countries, then it was a decade of all kinds of liberations, women's movement,
Gay
rights, also colored people activism, and all this. We cannot actually remember anymore how much it affected the world. But that movement didn't exist in Eastern European countries, nor in Russia. So the whole Eastern Bloc didn't have that. So when you think about, for example, attitudes towards equality, race questions, gay rights, women's rights, then if you want to have the mainstream opinion, then think about the mainstream opinion in the 50s in Western European countries, and then you start to get to, you know, how conservative it might be as well. And yet at the same time, it's very important to support the democratic development in those countries, because, you know, democracy is, I think, the only system that can actually, you know, help all the rights, you know. So in that way, when the system becomes more democratic, then anyway, women's rights, gay rights, colored people rights, all rights anyway get there. So also, so in that way, it's the only way I can see how it should go.
So it must have been an enormous kind of bursting of flags at the moment the war fell, of all those different prejudices that existed suddenly having to change. I mean, how important were the arts at that point in trying to translate some of that feeling, or how did it happen?
Well, the 90s was very chaotic, optimistic, and also very wild in a way. At the same time, I think quite many artists, they try to catch up with what had been happening in the West.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, certain people had all the access to all the culture, music, books that they hadn't had before. I mean, Iron Curtain meant that you didn't have the same books we had in the Western countries. You didn't have the same music, or it was very difficult to get your hands on. So not the same music. So in a way, in that way, it was like, you know, all this stuff, and we'll have to catch up. When I think about, for example, how fiction deals with the recent past problem, then it hasn't been very active. I think it just takes time. It's too early. It's too early.
So you were born in 1977, so you had your first 13 years of your life. What books were you reading when you were, 10, 11, 12, and starting to read relatively grown-up books?
Actually, the first grown-up books I read were a romantic historical fiction by Victoria Holt.
Sorry, that's wonderful. How did you get your mitts on them?
Well, they had beautiful covers.
So they were on sale?
On libraries, so yeah, and also angelic books by Serjan Golon. So a lot of historical romantic fiction to start with.
And was there a flood of a completely different kind of fiction afterwards that you didn't open your eyes?
I read all kinds of books, so in a way I wasn't picky at all. I read everything. So.
But did you have a sense of missing something?
At the time, no. Not really. But
what about your parents? What about your mother? What were the influences that shaped her?
Well, she's a book lover. I mean, she read a lot, and the interesting thing, yeah, perhaps that is something that actually affected me as well. Estonian books in Estonia during the Soviet period were extremely valued, and people were really like trying to get their hands on all kind of books that nobody would read anymore. For example, essays about nature. As long as the book was written in Estonian, I mean, Estonian language was a thing, then it was a bestseller, it was a hit, and it was a good stuff. And in that way, actually, you know, the literary culture also kept alive the faith in independence. Also, it kept alive the national identity despite the occupation. So in that way, in Estonia, books, literature, and especially books in Estonian language, they played a huge role in.
But were they censored?
Of course, they were censored. But that's why those essays on nature were so important, because you could write between the lines. So actually, when someone is writing about, you know, Estonian flowers, then actually you can read it as a poem or celebration. Yes. So in that way. But of course, everything was censored. So in a way, well, for example, Solzhenitsyn wasn't printed. Solzhenitsyn's huge testimony on Gulag camps, archipelago Gulag, was printed first time in Estonia after the collapse of Soviet Union.
But did you have, for instance, the Solzhenitsyn, were they there as contraband? I mean, as books that people had smuggled in secret.
Yes, yeah. People were copying foreigners and smuggling them, and also Estonian dissident poets. Their manuscripts were contrabanded to the West. For example, in Purge, I'm quoting Estonian poet Rummo, and he was a dissident author whose manuscripts were actually smuggled to West under a shirt.
And they got published?
In Finland, yes.
And there was some great rock band, wasn't there, in the 70s? Wasn't there a Finnish or Estonian rock band that you talked about in the speech?
Yes, that was interesting. Nice that you remember that. The Finnish rock band was Sleepy Sleepers. Yeah. Finland has quite a special political history in that way that when the Soviet Union was alive and kicking, Finland was living under Finlandization. And that meant that Finland was independent, yet we had to get acceptance from Moscow to all kinds of important decisions. And that also affected the freedom of speech as well. For example, the book I mentioned, Archipelago Gulag, was not published in Finland. It was published in Finnish in Sweden. So in that way, it was available in Finnish, but Finnish bookstores, some of them refused to sell it actually. Some libraries refused to have it. Some department stores actually refused to have it. Now I already forgot what you were actually
coming around about the book that was published.
Oh yeah, Sleepy Sleepers, yeah. And Sleepy Sleepers was a band extremely popular. They were singing about Karelia, and now Karelia is a territory Finland lost to Soviet Union after the Second World War. And that meant that 500,000 Finnish people were evacuated to Finland, and the Karelia is now part of Russia, but before it was part of Finland. And this rock band was singing a song about getting Karelia back, and it was considered at the time extremely dangerous and extremely political. And it was political, yes, but officially you couldn't talk about things like that. But on the other hand, it does tell something about people, because people loved the band, and politicians were horrified about Finnish rock band singing about getting the lost land back.
You were just born at that point. Were there a lot of other programs? Did anything in your childhood kind of prepare you for the political writing you have become?
Well, perhaps living into.
But were your parents? You said your mother was a great reader. Were your parents political?
No.
So they
absolutely no. I mean, it would. If they had been political, it would be. We wouldn't have. We wouldn't have had the chance to travel around the Soviet Union. My father was working in the Soviet Union for almost 50 years.
And you went all around with him?
Not all the time. I went to school in Finland. But we did travel a lot as well. But if you had been political, we wouldn't have ever get the visa.
And what were the first things you started to write? What kind of things did you write as a young woman?
I started to have the diary when I was 6, and that's when I started to. That's when I learned to write as well. So immediately I wanted to have a diary, and I have no idea why I wanted to have a diary. Perhaps I had seen a movie where a girl is having a diary or something like that. And after that, I also started to write stories.
What kind of stories did you write?
Stories about animals in the woods, kind of, fairy tale. So,
and what were the first political writings you did?
I think all writing is political, so in that way it's difficult to say what is actually, political.
Well, I would call the two I have read, does both extremely political novels, because you take big issues and you challenge the world about freedom of speech and corruption and collaboration and the country being taken over. So I just wondered what the journey was that took you from a 13-year-old girl with a wall fell down to the writer you are today.
I have to say that perhaps I should, read my old stories, because I was writing about animals, and animals can be also very symbolic. So I don't know what kind of stories about foxes, for example, or bears I have written, or has the fox ate a bunny or something like that. That might be also, a political story.
Do you find that you are now involved in the politics of your country because of your writing? Have you become a voice that you can use your voice towards things you believe in?
Yes. The good thing is that author doesn't have a boss, so that means that there's no one, limiting my freedom of speech. So yeah, but I think writing is always political. Anyway, I mean, also.
What about Victoria Holt?
In a certain way, I'm sure that if I make an interpretation of Victoria Holt's novels right now, I could find a political angle as well.
Well, good. We've got about 10 more minutes. Would anyone like to ask some questions? Have we got a microphone?
Almost as shy as Finnish people.
Are Finnish people very shy?
They are very shy.
Oh. Yes, okay. Right, we're all ready, if anyone does. Yes, down here at the front. We got a...
Bueno, no tengo una pregunta muy elaborada sobre la literatura de ella.
Can you hear?
No, me gusta mucho preguntar cómo es el oficio del escritor en tu caso, cómo escribes, cuánto tardas en escribir una novela, qué tan difícil se te hace la escritura de una novela, cuál ha sido más difícil que otras, como el oficio.
Different stories take a different route. For example, Purge was first a play, and at the time I didn't have urge or need to turn the story into a novel. The reason why I was very certain that this story needs to be on stage is that, well, it's about sexual abuse. And when I was reading about the trauma reactions, I noticed that the typical reaction might be that the victim starts to avoid eye contact. So that's when I thought that, okay, this absolutely must be a story that needs to be on stage. I mean, something that tries to avoid eye contact needs to be visible. That was the kind of the starting point for that format, I mean the format of the play. But when I was writing the play, I was almost finished with it. I did have a lot of material I still wanted to use, and then I just started to write a monologue, which was absolutely too long for a play, and then I noticed that I actually had started to write a novel. And at first I was a little bit I wasn't certain, I mean, does it pay off? Because I had already written the play, I mean, why to write a novel? But after a while, I was convinced that it's worth it. I mean, you can have much more detailed description in a novel compared to play. I mean, play is always a very short text compared to a novel. And then again, when the dogs disappeared, I knew that I'm going to write a play as well, but I wrote the novel first and play afterwards. But there was no special reason why the novel came out first, except that my editor at the publishing house is a fast reader, and Finnish National Theatre is a very slow reader, so in a way, that's one reason why the novel came out first. But also the reason why I wanted to have it on stage is that when you think about two different occupations, Germans and Soviets, they had totally different kind of visual world as well. And in propaganda, pictures and all the visual stuff is very important, and I wanted to see what kind of possibilities that kind of material has on stage. And then again, that is something that I cannot actually write in the book. I mean, I cannot, for example, remind the reader all the time that now there's a Hitler's picture on the wall, for example. Of course, some readers think like that, but I cannot, remind them. Then again, on play, I mean, you can have it all the time. For example, so. But for some reason, it seems like that I'm always writing novel, something for the stage, or for something that is not a novel, and then again a novel. So in a way, that kind of way to work is natural to me. It's also like because it's very different kind of writing. I mean, when you're writing a play, it's like you are just writing a skeleton. or airplane, or you are drawing the silhouette of the airplane, and then the rest of the team is actually flying with the plane. You know, the actors, the directors, and all the rest of the team. So it's very different. It's collective art form. So it's very different in that way. Yeah, you never actually know how the story starts. I usually use the first person when I write, and then change the story into a third person. That seems to be typical of me as well.
There's a gentleman at the very back.
Como la escritora se define como una escritora política, quería preguntarle cuál considera el sistema económico y político más conveniente para la libertad y la igualdad social y la equidad de los pueblos. Gracias.
What is the question exactly?
La pregunta es, la escritora se define como escritora política. Yo le pregunto cuál considera que sea el modelo económico y político más conveniente para que se respete la libertad y haya mayor equidad e igualdad en los pueblos, en las sociedades, en las democracias.
Finland is according to different international statistics and foundations, is supposed to be #1 in freedom of speech. I can say that the press is free and the authors are free to say whatever you want. Nobody gets any kind of problems with that. But then when you start to think about, for example, the economical issues, all the press is anyway dependent on advertisements, for example. And that means that if the paper is writing about, for example, something that doesn't appeal to readers, then it means that they don't get advertisements. They don't get anyone to buy them. And that means that they have to write anyway the stories that make readers click. And that's again, so that's something that I find a little bit problematic, because that means that actually the press is dependent on consumers, and also because they are dependent on what people find entertaining, and that isn't always the journalism or investigative journalism either. Then what I have to say that most of the Finnish people are not very political, and that is. And that might have something to do with the fact that with the years of Finlandization, at the time there was extreme right wing, which was very, very strong, and at the time you couldn't be a non-political author. It was impossible. Everybody had to be political, and that I think, you know, that my generation in Finland has actually taking it's kind of a backlash, that nobody wants to be political because the previous generation was so political. But then again, Finnish authors have always written about social problems, even Fredrika Runeberg, she was very aware of women's problems and also the whole generation of female authors. They were writing about working women, single mothers. At the time, there were very radical topics actually to write about single mother, for example, or drinking women, for example, women having affairs. So in that way, they were actually, when I think about how conservative the world was at the time, they were very radical themes. And also, at the same time, we also had a lot of female playwrights who were also touching these same topics. And I have to say that when I think about the gender equality in Finland, then we have to say thanks to those generations, because they were the women who made these issues part of the public debate. And that it wasn't easy for them at the time, but I think that's the thing that I can thank now for that generation, for the situation where we do have, 50% of the authors are female, and it's normal to be a female author also in all Nordic countries, and that's quite a rare situation when I think about the whole world. Yeah, in that way. And they were paying a lot of attention also to the education. They're very, active in all educational matters. So that's why I think that generation of those female authors were very important. And also why that generation is also important, that was the time when Finnish literature was actually born. Before that, Finnish language was for peasants. It was not considered a proper language for poetry or fiction.
What was the proper language?
Proper language was Swedish. So upper class was talking Swedish, all the educated universities, everything was in Swedish, and then the poor people and peasants were talking Finnish. And at the time, certainly, we had this national movement. This was a national movement who wanted to get independence for people. And that's how the language is actually connected to that, because they were people who started to think that independent Finland needs to have its own language, and it cannot be any other language than Finnish. And how can we have an independent state with own language, Finnish, but not without a literature? So that's when they started that, okay, we need to have literature of our own, and also we have to have a literature that is written in a language that all people can read, quite simply, because peasants couldn't read Swedish. So in that way, it's all connected. The independence, language, equality, social welfare, they are all connected to this same knot, actually.
And so it's important to you that you write in Finnish.
Yes, it is, and quite often all people who come from big language territories, they wonder, and I've met also a few English people who ask, so why don't you write in English? Which is kind of, it's not my native language, so in a way it's not my writing language.
It's very arrogant.
Yeah, but in a way that's why it's also. I think people are always at best when they can use their native language.
Well, I'm afraid we've now run out of time, so I'd like to say thank you very, very much. Both the books are, maybe more, but certainly heard with regards to our own, so thank you very much to our translator. Thank you very much to all of you for coming this afternoon.
Thank you.
Bueno, le recordó al público, por favor, que La firma del libro se va a realizar entonces allí donde se encuentra la mesa, por si de pronto desea comprar el libro. Gracias.